Good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda Thomas, and I would like to welcome you to Science on Tap. Tonight, we are going to be talking about Understanding Bird Behavior, an illustrated guide to what birds do and why. This lovely book right here. Whoops, let me turn it the right direction. And we are very pleased to be joined by Dr. Wenfei Tong, who is a biologist and an author. And she has some wonderful things to tell you about birds. And birds seem to be a very popular topic here at Science on Tap. So we are very glad that all of you are here this evening. Speaking of the book, I want to mention that, let's go forward. You can buy the book directly from Princeton Press and get a 40% discount. So you have to go to the Princeton Press website. You can't just order it from anyone, but if you use the coupon SciTap and on the Princeton site, and you can do that before October 1, so you have a week to do that. You can get 40% off the book. And I encourage you to do that because, as you'll see here tonight, it is a beautiful book with a lot of really fabulous information in it. So I'll put that up again at the end. And I know that our folks who are watching the chats will also have those links and things available for you as well. So what are you doing here? Here at Science on Tap, what is this thing that we're doing? We are so glad that you are here. We have been doing Science on Tap in Portland and Vancouver for about 7 years, in person and live in theaters, and now we've moved online. And so we are doing these events most Thursdays. And our main goal is to have people, adults in particular, be engaged and excited about science. And so hopefully if you are here, you are engaged and excited about science and also about birds. So we are, what you can expect this evening. Just want to let you know if you are new to us here at Science on Tap. Dr. Tong is going to speak for, 45, 50 minutes or so, and then we're going to have time for Q&A afterwards. So if you are watching on Zoom, if you want to submit questions for the Q&A, you can either submit the questions in the chat or in the Q&A sections. If you're in the chat, I encourage you to make sure at the top there's a little blue section and change it to all panelists and attendees, so that way everybody can see that. We have some folks who are watching the chat there who will be sending those questions to me, and then I can ask those during the Q&A at the end. And also, if you are joining us on Facebook Live, you can write in the comments, and we have one of our team members who's also watching that, and she will send those questions to me as well. And a recording of this talk will be available in the next couple of days on our YouTube channel. And here are some of the things that we currently have on our YouTube channel. Most of our previous events and also many of our podcast episodes. So I encourage you to go check that out after the show. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome our speaker tonight, Dr. Wenfei Tong, who's going to tell us all about birds.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this chance to talk to all of you about my books and about one of my passions, which is birds in general and nature and science as well. I'm really glad that the fires and the smoke have gotten better. I'm in Montana right now, and we were getting some of the smoke last week, so I really sympathize. I'll just start the slideshow so that you can see. Most of the slideshow will be photographs and paintings of my own. Most of which actually the paintings are not in the book at all, but I just wanted to show some of them to you to give you an idea of what motivates me about birds. So there are some beautiful illustrations and draw paintings in the book itself, but I don't really have the copyright for them, so that's partly why I'm not showing them in this presentation. So I thought I would start off the hello. There we go. I thought I would start off the slideshow with this photograph I took of a yellow warbler when I was doing my PhD. This is up in Massachusetts, where I used to like going to a barrier island to birdwatch a lot. And it just symbolizes a lot of what birds mean to me in terms of being very hopeful about the future, as well as the sense of freedom that they inspire in people. And I think this is very inspiring for our creativity, both as scientists and as artists, and it really is a beautiful way to appreciate the rest of the world and other species other than us. And so one thing I really try to do in my books is give people an idea of how easy it is to identify with other species, especially with birds, and to explain not just what they can do and the diversity of behaviors that they're capable of, but also why they've evolved such a diversity of behaviors. And within that gamut of diversity, you probably find a lot to identify with. I certainly do myself. So just to give you an idea of where that comes from, I've always identified with animals from a very early age, and I tend to assign people that I know well a particular animal. And so when I did my PhD defense, I ended up, it's traditional to thank people at the end of your PhD for all the help they've given you. And this was the last slide I had because I didn't have a lot of photographs of people. So I ended up having all these sketches of people that were very dear to me that I'd assigned animals to. And you can see that there are quite a few birds in here as well as mammals. Of note is the bowerbird on the top left corner, which is one of my professors when I was an undergraduate, and his name is Henry Horn. And I gave him a bowerbird because in addition to being a very inventive and sort of creative scientist, he was also a fantastic artist. And one of the things satin bowerbirds do is they build these wonderful bowers, which are essentially ways to attract females to their courtship arena. And then they decorate it beautifully with all sorts of collections of little berries and trinkets and sort of blue bottle caps if they can find them in the slightly littered forests of northern Australia nowadays. And this is basically a gallery that's perfectly arranged so that each male has his own showcase of his creativity for females. So Henry Horn wasn't, it wasn't in a inappropriate context, but he was a very inventive and creative and very inspiring professor. And there were other people involved in sort of inspiring me, which I try to talk about in the books as well, in terms of showing not just what birds do, but also how we as scientists find out about, test our ideas about why birds do what they do and why they've evolved those behaviors. And more recently, because of the pandemic, I was living in New York, and I would get out every day to walk my dog and just come back home and sort of sketch the birds that I saw in the park every day. And so another thing birds mean to me is just they route me to a particular place everywhere I go. And at any time of year, I sort of have a good sense of where I am and what time of year it is just from the birds I'm seeing and the birds I'm hearing. And I love that about birds. So that's another thing I think probably many of you share and which I try to convey in the books. This is just a bunch of sketches of birds that started to be like neighbors in New York. So these are the two books. The first book I wrote is called Bird Love, and that's more focused on the family life of birds, so on reproductive behavior, whereas my second book, Understanding Bird Behavior, which just came out, is about other behaviors as well, such as finding food or social behavior in general, not just with mates or with children. And I love this image. This is in one of the books. It's one of the first places I sort of started as a field biologist, and it's in northern Kenya. So the mountain you see in the background is Mount Kenya. And in the foreground are these fascinating birds called grey-capped social weavers. So that acacia tree is dotted with their little nests. And there are all sorts of questions you can ask from just looking at the scene. One is that as an evolutionary biologist, I like to think about things going back deep in time. So what is it about bird behavior that links us in a very deep evolutionary sense in terms of shared, not just shared behaviors, but sometimes shared hormones or shared genes that promote those behaviors in a very mechanistic sense. And also, you'll notice that these bird nests are, there are a bunch of them in the tree. And so another question you could ask is, why do some birds nest in groups while others don't? And that's a general question you can ask about organisms in general. So why do humans, for instance, why are we such a social organism while others aren't? And then digging further in, you can ask why some individuals are more social than others within a species, which is another thing that people are getting very interested in the field of animal behavior. And this is just a close-up of one of those grey-cap social weavers with a little piece of down that it's about to line its nest with. So this is a photo I took later in the day. And one of the things that I talk quite a lot about in the books, and this is a photograph of, well, actually, maybe you can try and find it. It's a nest that's in the photograph. And this is from Zambia, where I did some of my field work as a postdoc. And I just find it fantastic that birds have such a diversity of structures that they build, as well as all the behaviors that they engage in. So this is a rattling cisticola nest. It's a very small, brown, sort of nondescript bird, smaller than a sparrow. And what it's done is it's created this nest out of living grass in the long grass, which is, it sometimes reaches sort of higher than your shoulder or even your head. And it's knitted the grass stems from within, stuck them together with lots and lots of little concentric lines of spider webs. So it's just this beautiful construction, and it's really hard to spot. So I'll show you a photograph of the same nest with an aerial view, and you can see it's sort of clearer. You can see how it's just beautifully lined on the inside with these spider webs, but it hasn't killed the grass at all. So if you're in the field trying to find one of these nests, it's worse than looking for a needle in a haystack. And so we had to find all these wonderful young field assistants in Zambia who could help children who could help us look for nests, because there's no way you can find enough nests to study otherwise. So you can go all the way from that kind of really spectacular structure to a much more typical bird nest that we're all familiar with. So this is an American robin that I used to see all the time, and I still do, and we're all familiar with them because they're all over America. And what it's doing is it's removing a little piece of a poo packet from one of its chicks. So birds are quite fastidious about keeping their nests clean, and they have all sorts of ways of doing that. So either the chicks will be sort of born knowing how to deposit their poo outside the nest, or in this case, this parent is simply picking up the poo and flying away with it every time one of its children decides it needs to relieve itself. And the other reason I put the robin in here is these birds just fascinate me because they're so ubiquitous, and they're also really, really tame. You always find them nesting around people's houses or on the street. And that's one of the things that got me into bird watching as a child, is a bird that nested right in the house and got me fascinated at the age of about 12, trying to figure out what the bird was. And from there, slippery slope, I wanted to know what every other bird I was seeing was. So I think in both books, I try very hard to have a selection both of exotic African or Asian birds that you might not be so familiar with, as well as typical backyard birds that are very common in both Europe and America. And along those lines, I was very amused earlier this spring when there was a pair of wood ducks that was hunting for a nest hole. And so the first line, on the left, you can see the female, and she was the one who was really scouting, whereas the male was accompanying her, and they're very monogamous wood ducks. So the male was quite dutiful. And she was just poking her head around and looking at all these holes. And on the top row, you can see a starling that was mobbing her. So there were a lot of other birds in the same large tree, and they were already nesting. And this wood duck was trying to find an appropriate nest hole and getting attacked. So in the book, there's quite a lot about both looking for an appropriate place to nest, as well as pair bonding behavior and courtship behavior, and sort of how birds that form long-lasting relationships tend to do better at rearing chicks if they've been in a relationship for longer, as well as keeping danger away, and that's part of the mobbing behavior that the starling is engaging in with the wood duck. There's other functions of nests. So in this case, there's a weaver bird. I also took this photograph in Zambia, and this is a male, and the whole point of his nest is not just a nest for him and his mate to rear eggs and chicks in, but also as a courtship signal. So males tend to build at least one nest, but often a few, and they use that to display to females. And in this case, if the female's not interested, not satisfied with the nest, she sometimes picks it apart and destroys it, and the poor guy has to start all over again, which is quite amusing to watch. There's also other ways that birds tend to select their mates. So I find this a fun example because barn swallows are so universal. You see them everywhere from Australia up to North America and all throughout Asia and Europe. And so I used to love actually flying from Europe to Africa, where I did my field work, and back again, and feeling like I was migrating with the barn swallows. But anyway, to cut to the chase, these are two North American barn swallows, and here you'll see that they're quite reddish in color, especially the male, which is further in front. Whereas if you were to look at European barn swallows, they're actually very pale white in front. So there's this question of why within a species you would see such a lot of variation in appearance. And it turns out that it's probably the females choosing mates that's driving this geographic variation. And the logic behind that is there was an earlier experiment, which is just brilliant in Europe, where people cut off the tails, the lovely long tail streamers on the male barn swallows, and they either stuck them back on exactly the same length as the control, or they artificially lengthened them, or they artificially shortened them. And then they looked to see which males had the most children, mostly by DNA fingerprinting. And the sort of punchline is that males with the artificially longest tails had the most children. So the inference there is that the females are going for the males with the longest tails, longer than the males would have in the wild, because presumably a longer tail is actually a handicap in terms of being aerodynamically efficient and being able to escape from predators or catch insects on the wing, things like that. But if you artificially lengthen the tails, the male is like this fantastic heartthrob, and he gets tons of mates. But the fantastic thing is, when people did the same experiment in North America, females weren't interested in the longer tails. And what seems to be the case is, in North America, if you artificially redden the front of a male, that's what the females are going for. And so that does seem to very nicely explain why North American barn swallow males are redder in front but don't have very long tails, whereas in Europe they have very long tails compared to the ones in North America, but they're not very red in front. That's sort of an example of the kind of stories that I have in the book. There's another one that I quite enjoy. This is about leks. So some birds, such as most of the chicken group, so something like grouse, which is what I've drawn here, have what we call a lek, where you've got a gallery where males sort of display en masse on a stage, which we call a lek. And females gather to look at all the males. So sage grouse do this, sharp-tailed grouse do this. In this case, we've got a black grouse, which is a European bird. And there was a brilliant experiment on black grouse where biologists put extra males, they put an extra stuffed females around a particular male. And they essentially created a heartthrob, because it turns out that one of the rules the females use to choose which male they're going to all go for is to follow other females. So it's sort of following a fashion, or success breeding success, where if there are lots of females attracted to one male, then everyone else is like, oh, in that case, he must be really sexy. I'm going to go for him too. And that seems to drive this very high skew in a sort of winner-takes-all situation where one male gets almost all the matings and other males are in the wings and they get no children in that generation at all. So it's a very costly kind of mating strategy. And here's a dusky grouse that I photographed in Montana that was literally charging me because he was all amped up on hormones during the breeding season. But I really like this photo because it just reminds me that birds are essentially dinosaurs. They're the only living dinosaurs that we have today. And sometimes, especially with things like chickens or ostriches, you can be very aware of that. I didn't want to give the impression that it's always males who are the showy sex. So in this case, with these red phalaropes, the slightly subdued individual on the left is a male, and the two fighting over him are females. And so I've got quite a lot of examples of what biologists call sex role reversals. And also I try to explain why we think that's both more rare in terms of among birds and mammals, as well as why there are these exceptions that prove the rule. And then there's the question of, well, once birds have found their mate, what do they do about it, and do they stay together? And these are superb fairy wrens, which are very, very common in backyards in Australia, but they look exotic and beautiful to someone who's not used to them. And on the left is a male, so he's the showy iridescent one. And he's displaying to a female with a flower petal. And these birds are fantastic. There are several species of fairy wren, and all of them tend to display with flower petals that either complement or match their plumage. So in this case, it's a species where they choose a complementary color. But the fun thing is they only display to neighbors that they're interested in having a sort of extra pair relationship with, rather than to their own social mate. So they do pair monogamously, and they do share all the childcare, and actually they're cooperative breeders, so the whole family the extended family will join in and help. But they're also the Guinness Book of Records winners for extra pair, for infidelity, basically. So within a particular nest, at least 3/4 of the chicks tend not to be fathered by the male who's taking care of them. And that means that males are always off seeking or courting the neighbors. And biologists found out that just by radio tracking them, because they were trying to figure out when these extra pair copulations, when these little affairs took place, that it's only just before dawn that a female will sneak off to whichever neighbor has most impressed her with his flower petal displays. And that's when she sort of sneaks off and has this little affair. And her mate is busy having an affair with another female. So it's this sort of Russian roulette situation. And that's quite common among songbirds in general. So about 90% of the birds that we think of as very monogamously paired up are socially monogamous, but not genetically monogamous. I also talk quite a lot about birdsong. So birdsong in general, this is a white-throated sparrow, a white-crowned sparrow, sorry. They're North American sparrow, but among a lot of sparrows and other birds, you'll find that birdsong has a sort of culture. So you'll find that a sparrow that's from California of the same species will sound completely different from one that's in Oregon. And there's lots and lots of fantastic books specializing on this. So I don't go into it in super amounts of detail, but I do find it intriguing in terms of the sort of parallels with human language in terms of cultural evolution in birdsong. I also talk about social relationships outside of mating. So this is a raven, and I just love corvids in general. And ravens are fascinating because they form very strong monogamous pairs, and they don't engage in a lot of extramarital affairs or anything like that. But what they do is keep track, because they're so brainy, keep track of all the other relationships in the sort of area. And so what's wonderful here is biologists have found that if you keep track of every single raven's behavior, the established territorial pairs that have been together for a long time and have their own large territory keep tabs on all the younger junior ravens who are at the dating, trying to find a partner stage. And that can take a raven up to 5 years to do. And they often switch partners until they find the right one. So the power couples will keep tabs on these younger ravens because once they have another territorial couple, that's a big threat. But until that stage, the other ravens are, they can be safely ignored because there's just like this large group of young people at a bar or something. They're not very threatening in terms of establishing a good territory. And so the power couples will selectively disrupt only the budding relationships of younger ravens that are almost at the stage of settling down. The power couples will sort of pick on them. And if they see these younger ravens really starting to get close and cuddly and sort of billing and cooing at each other, they'll fly in and break up the party. But they don't pay much attention to the ones who are just circulating and haven't really found someone special yet. So I just find that fascinating that these birds can keep so many relationships in their minds and act on it in such a political way. It really reminds you of human politics. And another much more small-brained bird, this is a vulturine guinea fowl, and I took this photograph in Kenya in the same place that I used to do my field work. They're beautiful birds. They're much more arid adapted than the typical guinea fowl you see. That's the helmeted guinea fowl imported from West Africa. And they actually form these rather large social flocks of about 60 birds. But just, I think, last year, a study from the Max Planck came out where the biologists had basically followed every individual bird and tracked its social network over time. It's almost like a real-time bird version of Facebook or something, but in person. And they found that within that big flock of 60, the birds, the vulturine guinea fowl, actually have their preferred families with whom they tend to have dinner with regularly. So within that large foraging flock of about 60, there are actually subgroups of families that spend more time feeding closely together and doing things together and roosting together rather than everyone in the flock of 60 just freely mingling. So they basically have social groups nested within social groups, very much like us. Another complicated version of social behavior is with acorn woodpeckers, which is a species that's found right throughout southwestern North America and Western North America, and into Central America. But what's fascinating about this species is in parts of California, they're extremely social and they form what we call cooperatively breeding groups, where you've got multiple pairs that share the same nest hole and they share all sorts of nest responsibilities. And what I've drawn here is an acorn granary, which is one of the reasons a large group is helpful. These birds basically store millions of acorns in the trunks of trees, and they individually hammer bespoke holes for every acorn that they bring back and stuff the acorn in. And then they have to guard this, not just from other birds, but from other acorn woodpecker gangs as well. And so the larger gang you have, the more acorns you can amass, and the better you can guard them. And presumably the more offspring you can rear as a group, even though everyone's laying eggs in the group and laying eggs in the nest and contributing eggs to them. So one thing I find fascinating about the system is not just the cooperation, which is wonderful, but also that just like with human societies and groups, once you have a cooperative coalition, there's a lot of opportunity for conflict and for cheating from within. And these acorn woodpeckers have that too. So you often find situations where females will chuck each other's eggs out of the nest because they would rather have everyone incubate their eggs and only their eggs. So there's a lot of wasteful egg throwing in addition to the cooperative aspects of the group being together and raising children together and storing the acorns together. Another less sophisticated version of group breeding, but that sometimes occurs, is these Canada jays, which used to be known as Greyjays, which is probably quite common around where anyone who's in the sort of, well, the colder bits of North America would know these birds. And in Europe, there's a very similar bird called the Siberian jay. One of the lovely things these birds do is they stick food onto the sides of trees with their saliva. They've got a special sticky saliva. But the other thing that I've always been able to relate to when I think of friends whose children are still at home because they can't afford to find a place of their own. Real estate is just too expensive. These birds are in the same situation. They often find that there isn't a territory available. Everything's taken, and real estate there's a shortage of real estate. And so young birds have to just stay at home. They either stay at home with their own parents, or they find another territorial couple to stay with. And then they sort of have to earn their keep by helping to take care of the couple's children or helping to store food for the winter. So I find that quite a fun example of another version of cooperative breeding and delayed dispersal. And connected to that is there are just a lot of ways for birds to care for their chicks. And so here we've got a snowy plover, but one of the things that I find fascinating in this case is that shorebirds, like these plovers, have very, very independent chicks. And so they tend to not have to spend that much time and effort taking care of the chicks compared to something like a robin, which has very, very, very helpless chicks. And so this sets up a dynamic where sometimes one or either parent will try to be the first to abscond, to leave the other one as a single parent. And with these birds, you sometimes find a situation where whichever sex is in greater demand, so whichever sex is rarer, can afford to abscond first because they're more likely to find another partner and have more children that way. And then the other one is literally left holding the babies and does so. But there are also examples of shorebirds like this jacana, where it's always the male that takes care of the chicks, not the female. So this bird here with the two very sweet, long-legged, long-toed chicks is always a male. And so I try to explain why that's sometimes the case too. You also find situations, actually I was just floating a river and we saw lots of these mergansers, although they were already grown up at this point. But early in the summer, you'll see a female merganser with something like 20 ducklings behind her. And one explanation for that is not because she's laid 20 eggs herself. It's just that these birds very commonly dump their eggs in the nest of another female. So this is parasitism, into reproductive parasitism. We call it brood parasitism within a species. And it's almost like females think, well, I've got a bunch of eggs of my own in my own nest, but why not just lay a few extra in someone else's nest to hedge my bets or something? And so they all swim around later in the summer with tons of children. And I just love watching this. But it does set up a tricky situation for some species. So this is an American coot chick, and you'll notice it's really colorful. And at first glance, you would think, well, that's not a great idea if you're trying to hide from predators to advertise yourself with all this colorful skin and these little yellow tufts on the ends of your down feathers. But with experiments, biologists have actually snipped off the ends of those little yellow down feathers and painted over the heads so that the little coot chicks have black heads instead of red heads. And they find that when they do that, the coot chicks get less food from the parents. So one idea is coot chicks so coots, like the mergansers I showed you earlier, often dump their eggs in the nests of others. And so that sets up a sort of selection pressure for parents to be somewhat choosy and not to just indiscriminately care for everyone, because all parents have limited resources. So you don't necessarily want to just shower care and food on a whole lot of children who aren't your own at the expense of your own genes ultimately. And so natural selection has favored parents who are somewhat discriminating, and that has set up a selection in favor of the coot chicks to be as appealing as they can and to solicit as much care as they can. And that's the idea behind why they're so colorful, is if they weren't, they wouldn't get as much food from the parents. There's another thing that birds do in terms of hedging their reproductive bets, which is to have often more children than they can necessarily afford to raise. And that happens a lot with raptors, including owls and eagles. And so one thing that these birds do, which is different from a lot of smaller songbirds, is they start incubating the moment the first egg is laid. And that creates a real size difference. So it creates an immediate imbalance in size and power between the offspring of a particular clutch, so that you have one large chick and then little Russian dolls or something. By the time you get to the runt of the litter or the runt of the clutch, it's not got that much chance of surviving, unless it's a bumper of the year and there's tons of food and then everyone lives. Otherwise, you tend to sadly get a situation where the youngest one is there largely for insurance in case one of the older eggs is addled and doesn't hatch or something. Otherwise, the youngest tend to be the ones that starve to death most years. And so that's a slightly dark side of bird reproduction, but it's quite common as a reproductive strategy in a lot of organisms. And this is even worse. It's a pair of great blue herons, and at least great blue herons don't always kill their siblings, but with things like great egrets, they always do. So they tend to lay a few eggs, or often two. And by the time the chicks have fledged, there's only one left, because the older one tends to kill the younger one as a matter of course. This is a bit happier. This is a great blue heron, adult great blue heron feeding. So I've been talking a lot about reproductive behavior, I realize, but there's a whole chapter in understanding bird behavior about finding food. And so this is a great blue heron that I saw in California, and I was trying to figure out what it was doing. And it was sort of pacing around in the long grass, looking down. And then suddenly its neck just shot out like a snake, and it came up with this ground squirrel, which it proceeded to dunk in the water until it drowned the squirrel and then had to swallow it. So it's a bunch about finding food. I also try and emphasize birds that are individuals. So there's a big push now in animal behavior and evolutionary biology to not just study birds as species and assume that all birds of a particular species, of a particular population are identical, but to look at what drives individual differences. Just like if you were teaching a group of children, or if you're a manager of a company or something, you don't assume that all your colleagues or all your students are identical, right? You know that they're individually, they have different personalities. And so this bird is one of my favorite birds. He's Vulchi, and he lives in Kenya. And he was one of the first birds to be written up, but actually by Jane Goodall and her then husband, to have tool use. And these are Egyptian vultures. And I think Vulchi was one of the key characters in this early animal behavior paper. So this is what they do. They use stones to to break open ostrich eggs so that they can eat the yolk. And it doesn't seem so fantastic now that we know about the fancy things that crows do and a lot of the corvids do. But this was a very early recognition of bird intelligence. So that's in the Finding Food chapter. There's also another aspect of the finding food, which I find fascinating, which is how birds form relationships with other species. And this is another place where the individual differences comes out. So biologists have figured out ways to study personality in other species. And they do that by doing various tests of things like how risk averse or how risk prone, how much risk an individual is willing to take, or how shy or how bold they are. And so they did this with a bunch of elk and a bunch of magpies, black-billed magpies. And then they looked at which individuals tended to spend a lot of time together. And they found out that only the shyest elk are willing to put up with the boldest magpies who like to pick ticks off the elk. So this is a mutually beneficial relationship because the magpies are getting some food and the elk are getting ticks removed. But if the elk is too bold, it doesn't like having a bird on its back and it chases it away. And if the magpie is too shy, it daren't do this. So it's one of these situations where there's a interspecies relationship, but it's only applicable to certain individuals with a particular personality. So I love this sort of recent study where people are focusing on individual differences. Another theme that I try to bring out in the books is this idea of convergent evolution, the idea that you have similar solutions evolving independently over evolutionary time if they work. So on the top left is a sunbird, which to a North American audience would look a lot like the hummingbird, which I photographed on the bottom right. And they're actually completely independently evolved lineages, but both birds basically live on nectar, both groups of species. And they're both very diverse and they're both very small and they both fly very fast and live on sugar. And one of the studies I feature in the book is by one of my friends. So I also try to feature scientists who are not necessarily, well, a diversity of scientists. And so my friend for PhD found out that at the molecular level, not all birds taste sweet things. In fact, most don't because they don't eat sweet things. So there's no reason for them to be able to taste sweet. But then that begs the question of how birds like hummingbirds or sunbirds have managed to taste sweet things and find it rewarding so that they want to eat nectar and sort of, stay in Portland all year round to feed on your hummingbird feeders. And to do that, they've actually evolved to adjust a gene that's actually for the umami taste receptor. So umami is the sort of taste of soy sauce or amino acids, meat. This is a very savory taste, right? And it turns out most birds have that taste receptor, but in the hummingbirds, that gene has copied itself, and then the extra copy has evolved into a sweet taste receptor. That's a really fascinating example of, and she's hoping to show that that's the case for sunbirds too, but we don't know how they taste sweet yet. That's to be discovered. Another nice example of convergent evolution is, as I was talking about the magpies and the ticks. This is an oxpecker, and these two are oxpeckers that on an African buffalo rather than an American bison. And one of the things oxpeckers do is, in addition to just picking the ticks off large ungulates, they sometimes drill a bit deeper and get a free blood meal from the ungulate as well. So that's an example of what I find very interesting in evolution, where, again, like the acorn woodpeckers, you have a superficially cooperative relationship, but cooperation is always somehow subject to cheating. And in this case, the cheating takes place because the oxpeckers decide to start. There's a sort of fine dividing line between when it's purely mutualistic and when the relationship starts to get a little uglier. And I don't know how the ungulates enforce this, or if they do at all, or if they decide it's a small enough cost to give the oxpecker a little bit of extra blood so they don't do anything. And this is the North American equivalent, although these brown-headed cowbirds don't go for the blood of North American bison. They do follow bison around, and they're called cowbirds because they also follow cows around. They're basically after the insects that the large ungulates flush up out of the grass. But one other thing that's fascinating about these birds is they're also brood parasites, and they're parasites on other species rather than being parasites on their own species. So this means that they've basically got hundreds of species of other birds that make nests and that rear their children for them. So cowbirds never nest, and they don't even know how to do it. They spend all the time flying around looking for some other species in whose nest they're going to stick their eggs in. And this has become a huge conservation problem for North America because with human development, we've basically cleared enough of the forests that it's become very attractive to cowbirds, which are typically birds of the plains. And so with the expansion of their habitat, they've started preying on parasitizing birds that are completely evolutionarily naive and undefended against a brood parasite. And this has caused birds like this Kirtland's warbler, which is only found in Michigan and bits of Wisconsin, to almost go extinct. I think it was down to a few pairs a few decades ago, and it's now making a comeback. There are Kirtland's warbler festivals, but I just find that a very interesting example of how these interspecies relationships can be very cooperative and they can be very destructive as well. And to drum that point home, this is a bird that I studied for my postdoc in Zambia on the bottom left, on the bottom right. So that deadly thing with this billhook is a greater honeyguide chick, and it's a parasite, it's a brood parasite. And the very cute Muppet-like green things are little bee-eater chicks, which are almost about to fledge. So this is a happy family. But if there was a brood parasite, a greater honeyguide chick that had hatched with these little bee-eaters, we basically wouldn't be seeing them. It would have hatched, and while still blind and barely a day old, it would have stabbed all the other eggs or chicks in the nest until it had killed all the competition. So these brood parasites can be quite deadly. So that's a bad side of greater honeyguides, or sort of dark side. But these birds have a really fun Jekyll-Hyde situation going. So this is the Hyde side. The Jekyll side is that they're called honeyguides because they've evolved a relationship with humans, which is very sophisticated. They actually guide humans to honey, which is why they're called honey guides. So this is a real life honey guide together with a honey hunter in Mozambique. And the birds and the humans have an old relationship such that honey guides will signal to humans that they find in the forest. They will actually fly up to you and sing. And the humans who've been there for long enough have taught each other what the bird's signaling. So the bird actually signals through its song, through its calls, not just where a beehive is, but how far the person is from the beehive. And the people, I understand this. And what the birds benefit from all this is that they like racks, and they can't get the beehives down and sort of distract the bees without the help of the humans, but the humans actually just want the honey. So it's a real win-win situation, and it's a fascinating and very old relationship. And we don't know how honey guides learn or whether they teach each other how to do this. But it is true that with increasing urbanization, a lot of human groups in Africa have lost the ability to understand the honey guides. And it seems like the honey guides probably have lost the ability to communicate with humans too. But this is something that's really understudied, other than this one brilliant study by one of my colleagues, Claire Spottiswoode in Mozambique. Another cool thing that birds do is they communicate with each other. So here's a Japanese great tit, and it's listening to an alarm call. And these tits, but also all sorts of other birds, have different alarm calls for different types of predators. And sometimes they understand this across species, which is fascinating. So it's almost like a language. So I talk about that in terms of dealing with danger. I also try and talk about migration and climate change. And so this is this is a white stork, and the bird. So this is the sort of stork that's fabled for carrying babies to people in Europe. So that's the picture on the left. The picture on the right, which is very striking, is from a bird in a museum in Germany, and there are quite a few of these Fleischstorks, and it's literally got a hunting spear, an African hunting spear, embedded in its neck. And this is one of the first pieces of evidence humans in Europe had that birds like storks migrated. Before that, they just thought, oh, well, for a long time, people in medieval Europe thought that barnacle geese literally turned into barnacles in the winter because, you know, the birds just disappear. So where do they go? And this stork shows up flying with an African spear embedded in its neck, and this poor thing is shot down by a German hunter. So it survived the African hunter just be shot down in Germany, but someone looked at the spear and said, well, this spear comes from Africa, and that's one of the first ways people have marked birds inadvertently to track their migration. And now we've got much more high-tech ways of tracking birds' migration. So I talk about that in understanding bird behavior. And I just wanted to end on a slide of snow geese, because this is one of my favorite sights in Montana every year, is this mass migration of snow geese that's flying over the Rocky Mountains and gathering to fuel up before they go up to the Arctic to breed. And so one of the other things that I discuss in understanding bird behavior is not just how we as humans have altered birds and sometimes even selected on them, such as with great tits, which are related to chickadees in North America, but that's a European species. People in Britain have been feeding these birds so much that they've actually selected for slightly longer bills in the great tits in Great Britain compared to the great tits in the rest of the European on the continent in Europe, which still have shorter bills because they don't go to feeders as much, and so they don't need to have such a long bill to reach the food. So we're changing birds and their behavior and their appearance, their morphology all the time by our actions, not just with big things like climate change, but with things like feeding them. And that's interesting to watch. It's a sort of natural experiment, but it's also, I try to bring up how if you like birds and you're already watching them and feeding them in your backyard, that you can contribute now a lot to what scientists know through citizen data. There are lots of platforms through which you can contribute data in terms of the birds that you're seeing every day and where you're seeing them. So that's something we can all do, even if we're stuck at home and have to wear masks all the time. If you go out, you can at least look out of your window, record the birds. And I think with that, I'll just stop and take questions. But I just wanted to end on a slide with another of the birds that made a big impression on me, Jamaican toady, which only occurs in Jamaica. And so there are all these birds that only occur in one part of the world or on a small island. And anything we can do to keep that sense of wonder alive, because there's so much diversity on this planet, is, well, I'd be in favor of doing that. And if my books can help do that, I'd be really happy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. And there are many people in the chat who are complimenting you on your artwork, both your watercolors and your photography. So beautiful stuff. And I encourage all of you who are watching that the books have some amazing photography and stories in them, both the Understanding Bird Behavior and the Bird Love book that Wenfei talked about before, but also her blog has some more of the watercolors on there. So we'll have our folks put those links up again. So yeah, anything you want to add about that before I ask some questions?
Well, just I suppose that to restate, those drawings are not in the book. I didn't want to falsely advertise.
Right. Yeah. Sorry if I misspoke.
No, you didn't. Yeah.
So to get to some of the questions, we have a lot of questions, and I gonna ask start with kind of a fun one. You talked about the magpie eating the tick off the elk, and but what are your thoughts about interspecies behavior involving play? Because there's numerous videos on the internet, like with crows and dogs, and it
It's
might be
wonderful.
antagonistic, might not be, but then there's a lot of play. Any thoughts about that?
I just wish people studied it more. It's so Mark Beckhoff is a biologist, retired now, I think, largely, but he's based in Colorado Boulder. And he and a couple of other people, there's a baboon biologist, Barbara Smuts, who's also started studying play in dogs. But it's really understudied in biology, and I think it's partly because of this sort of prejudice against anthropomorphism that most scientists are still getting over. And so play really gets at something that a lot of scientists are not keen on acknowledging other species indulging in, because then you have to sort of say things like, well, they're enjoying themselves. Yes, they are. So Bernd Heinrich, who's written tons of fantastic books, including The Mind of the Raven, has some lovely examples of ravens doing things like sliding down snowbanks, and they're clearly doing it for fun and they're getting a big kick out of it. And I think it's obvious that if a bird is teasing a dog or playing with another bird, they're playing, or they're playing with us if it's a pet bird. For sure, they're playing. And I think the more examples we have of that, the better. The only other thought I have is I try to the extent that people have documented this and studied it in a peer-reviewed scientific way, there are examples of birds that are quite creative in a musical way or in a dancing way, which there are a couple of studies on. So one of my favorites is these palm cockatoos that drum, and they have different males have different drumming styles. So the cockatoos ended up being named after different drummers. There's a Ringo Starr, I think, and you can hear them drumming, and they actually do that for courtship. So it's you could say they're enjoying it and it's playful, but it's also got a ultimate evolutionary function.
You mentioned briefly that you like to work with scientists who come from diverse backgrounds and
Oh yeah.
viewpoints. And there's a question about, can you elaborate on how different human cultural frames of reference have provided insight into bird behavior? How has increasingly diverse backgrounds of bird watchers helped us learn more about bird behavior? For example, female birdsong has been primarily documented by women.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a great question in terms of that's a great example in terms of the female bird song. So that's another thing which people have not really looked at for ages and has only more recently been paid attention to, largely because of more women studying birds in general and saying, well, hey, it's not always the males that are necessarily the ones singing. There's one of my favorite examples to do with this, and I don't know that it's always the case that a more diverse group of scientists necessarily are the ones who are going to pick this up, but there's a lovely example of Laysan albatross in Hawaii, which have been observed to form same-sex couples. And biologists only figured that out because they would see these pairs with two eggs. And one egg is just so expensive for Laysan albatross to lay that they pretty much never lay two eggs at once. They can't afford it. This one egg every 2 years. So if you've got a pair with two eggs in the nest, there must be two females. And so people have been studying that and looking at why the females do that, and also how long their pair bond lasts. And they found that those female female pairs, go through a lot of the same pair bonding rituals and they cement their relationship every year, and they sort of rear the chicks together. But sadly, two albatross can only rear one chick, so one of the females has to let it go, as it were. So that's one example where that's driven a lot of discussion about the frequency, as well as the sort of, well, how common same-sex relationships are in other species and what functions they might serve. There's also one of the examples I do talk about in Understanding Bird Behavior, which struck me a lot because it was an older paper, is there are these birds called red-billed buffalo weavers in Africa that, well, I guess I should back up. So it's quite rare for, most birds don't have an intromittent organ, most male birds. They just have a hole called the cloaca, which is what snakes and reptiles have, lizards have. And so mostly when birds mate, they just touch cloacas, they touch little holes, and the sperm gets transferred, and it's really fast, split second. But occasionally you have birds with an intromittent organ. So then, biologists spend a lot of time trying to figure out why the intromittent organ evolved in those birds. And this paper was all about the function of the little penis on the male red-billed buffalo weaver. And the scientists were essentially masturbating the weavers to see what happened. And there was zero. They really didn't look at what this might do from the female perspective at all. So it's still an open question. But along the same lines, there's a wonderful study done by a female biologist on ducks, which are a sort of rather dark version of bird mating systems, because the males will frequently, in some species such as mallards, they'll later in the breeding season essentially gang rape females. And so ducks have very impressive, certain species of ducks have very impressive penises. And she looked at the female end of things and found that there's this evolutionary arms race between the males and female reproductive tracts, where it's not in the female's interest to just be inseminated by random males. So she's got the evolutionary equivalent of a sort of chastity belt, where she's got this really, really corkscrewed vagina that is corkscrewed in the opposite direction from the male's penis, so that if she's not cooperating, it's hard for her to inseminate her, is basically the idea. Sorry, this is getting a bit X-rated.
That's okay. It's science. So related to reproductive behavior, I guess one of the first birds that you talked about was the satin bowerbird.
Oh, yeah.
And which I know about from another talk that we had on animal mating behaviors, and I think they're just adorable, or fascinating. But I know that they get a lot of blue things, and there's not a lot of blue things in nature, so obviously they have to go find blue bottle caps and things like that from humans. And I'm wondering if there are any other birds that you know of that incorporate man-made things in their ritual, in their mating behavior. Obviously feeding is a thing that birds get from humans, but any other things?
Well, I wasn't thinking so much mating behavior as nesting, because of course the satin bowerbirds, the bowers are not nests, they're just they're galleries, they're like art displays or beautiful houses or Porsches or something. But a lot of birds do incorporate human things into their nest structures. And sometimes this is not a good thing. So here in Montana, we've got a lot of hay fields, and the hay is rolled up in baling twine. And the ospreys love that stuff for their nests. So you'll see these really colorful osprey nests with blue and orange and green baling twine coming out of it. And that's not great for the birds because they strangle themselves or they get tangled up in the baling twine. But a nicer example of that is people have found that there's some small songbirds, including house sparrows, that line their nests with things like cigarette butts, which sounds really bizarre. But it seems, from a very limited set of experiments, like these help with deterring parasites and lice and things like that within the nest. So there's a bit of a pesticide element to some of the human things that birds choose to line their nests with. There is also there are examples of things like blue tits, which are again a bit like the European and Asian equivalent of chickadees, which will line their nests with extra feathers and extra trinkets. And that seems to be partly a courtship thing. So one experiment that I really like is, I think the biologists added extra trinkets to the nest and caused the males to think that the females were being courted by other guys. And as a result, the males reduced the amount of care that they gave. They didn't bring as much food back to the chicks because they thought they'd been cuckolded, basically. So, yeah.
Wow, very complicated. Had a question, I'm going to read it here. Do you think using terms like sexual role reversal and infidelity obscure the biological behavior of birds by transposing human cultural expectations? How hard is the scientific community working to not project their human expectations, especially regarding gender roles and sexuality, onto birds? And I noticed that you referred to one of the birds, or some of the birds, having personality, which I do that with my cats, and there's not really a good word that's not person-centric for that. So what do you think?
So I think that this is a personal thing and people get all knotted up in arguments discussing this, but I think that as long as, so one point I do try and make in my books is that evolution is completely amoral. It's not, so none of the behaviors I'm describing are supposed to prescribe anything about a take-home message that we should or shouldn't do, or that we should judge the birds for, or anything like that. However, that said, I do think that most of our behaviors and our impulses share an evolutionary origin with a lot of other animals, including birds, and right down to the hormones that cause pair bonds to be strong, or cause the letdown of milk and mother parent offspring bonds to be strong. So given that sort of shared evolutionary relationship, that very deep evolutionary origin to a lot of these behaviors, I don't think it's that wrong to, or that misleading to use similar words. Plus, I think it's really hard to police, because even though scientists try very hard to be objective, and we try not to use terms that are laden with other social meanings and moral values, if you look at the scientific literature, this is not consistent. So, for instance, we never use rape in the animal behavior literature. We just use forced copulation. But we use personality all the time. So if you look at an animal behavior journal or any top scientific peer-reviewed journal, it's all about the study of personality, and people are measuring personality, and it's in the title of the papers. Another example where this is not consistent is infidelity and divorce are both used in the literature, but something like marriage is not. So, you know, you can really go to town on where to draw the line. So I personally don't try that hard. I just use whatever term comes to mind as the one that's easiest for the most people to relate to, and that sounds the least jargony. But I do think it's important to bear in mind that all these behaviors are not the result of any sort of moral, and should not be used to draw moral implications from.
And I don't know if anybody else had this, but your audio buzzed a little bit on mine. So I'm just going to repeat that the behaviors should not be used as with any kind of moral implications. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, more questions.
Well, otherwise, all be killing our brothers and, doing justifying terrible behavior.
Yeah, let's not do that. um, so question about the lovely drawing you had with the mergansers and with all of the babies, and question about the behavior of dumping eggs in other nests, and obviously with that one in particular, you said I think 20 chicks. Can a female incubate all of those, or do they need incubation?
That's
How
such
does
a
that
good
work?
question. Yeah. So one of the things females often do is especially when they know that there are extra eggs in the nest, is they'll sort of roll theirs into the middle where they are going to get warmer and be better incubated. And in birds that have a large nest with multiple females' eggs, such as ostriches, you often have a single male and more than one female laying her eggs in that communal nest. There is the eggs on the outside do get colder and do have a poorer chance. So that is something that the birds are very aware of. And then it gets more extreme with other group nesting birds like the acorn woodpeckers I talked about, where they literally chuck the eggs out. And the general rule of thumb is if you haven't started laying your own eggs, you can chuck eggs out as much as you like. But once you've started laying your own eggs, you might chuck your own egg out, so then it's better to stop. So the dominant females tend to lay last so that they can throw everyone else's eggs out first.
Interesting. So complicated and
I
very
know.
fascinating. How birds are migrating this time of year? How do birds decide who's in front?
There's no evidence that they do, really. So they pretty much take turns. But there's, in all the studies of what we call collective animal behavior, whether it's fish schools or large flocks of birds, or social insects like ants and bees and termites, there's no evidence really of these large groups being led by a few. It's not like our political systems where you have leaders and everyone else is, whether they like it or not a leader. So other than things like geese, which do migrate in families, and so the older ones will tend to lead. If it's a large flock, it's very much more random. They will take turns. And also the bird in front is just getting tired because it's getting the most wind. So they will rotate just so that, they take turns on that.
I have one more question, but I want to encourage those of you who are sticking around on Zoom in particular. Wenfei has agreed to stick around for a little while after we're finished with our official event and answer some questions directly from the chat. So I won't be moderating them. So if you have more questions that you didn't get answered, go ahead and put those back in the chat, even if they were earlier, so that she can find them more easily. But the final question I'm going to ask is, obviously human behavior has changed a lot in the last 6-7 months because of the pandemic. And
Yes.
are there indications that bird behavior is changing as a result? So for example, somebody said that they heard, or there was an article on NPR today regarding the changing in pitch for a songbird due to the lessening of traffic noises in the area.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
That's pretty much the main study I know about too. So, I think in one of the books, I definitely talk about how in urban places, birds have changed the pitch of their song to deal with noise pollution. And now with less noise, people have already found that with recording all the bird song, they've changed it again. So it's just a lovely example of how plastic their behavior is. Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you. And like I said, we're going to finish up our event here, but she is going to stick around for a few minutes and answer some more questions. So with that, I am going to share my screen one more time.
So I should stop my video, right?
Yeah, just for now.
Okay.
And whoops. And remind you that Understanding Bird Behavior is available through the Princeton Press website at a 40% discount. Use the coupon code SciTap, and the offer is good through October 1st. So you have a week to do that. And again, that's only available through the Princeton Press website. I encourage you to get it because it's a lovely book. And the Bird Love book is also very charming. Our next event, we don't have anything scheduled for the 1st or the 8th yet, probably not going to, but the next event that we're going to be doing for Science on Tap is a special event because we are going to be back at the Alberta Rose Theater for Music and the Aging Brain with Dr. Larry Sherman, and who is a neuroscientist at OHSU, and singer-songwriter Naomi Laviolette. And they are going to be on stage in person, socially distanced, and there is an opportunity for up to, a very small group of people who can participate and be in the theater in seats like we used to. Very small number of people, and everyone's going to be socially distanced. However, you can also participate online, and it's part of the Portland Music Stream brought to you by the Alberta Rose Theater. So if you, I just posted this event on our website today. If you go to the Alberta Rose website as well, it should be available on their Facebook page. There's kind of a weird thing, so we'll get that figured out. But again, Music and the Aging Brain on Wednesday, not Thursday, but Wednesday, October 14th at 7 p.m. online, or for a very select few of you in person. Want to say a quick thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. We are up to 113, which is a increase over last week. I think we had 109, so it keeps growing, and we are so grateful to all of you to help us keep this thing going. I want to say a special thank you to Carol Stewart, who is one of our Patreon supporters. Thank you for being here and for helping us out. Really, really appreciate it. And there are 2 ways that you can help support us here at Science on Tap. We want to keep providing these events for free to as many people as we can, and have them available on YouTube so that people can watch them later, because, hey, science is important, and we want people to have entertainment and important science things to learn while we're all at home. So please help us continue producing these events. You can make a one-time donation through our nonprofit partner, which is an organization called Make You Think. You go to makeyoutthink.org/support, or you can join us on Patreon, be the 114th Patreon supporter over at patreon.com/makeyoutthink. And we are grateful, even if it's $1, we are really grateful for any support that you can provide. So thank you all for being here, and I am going to leave this slide up and welcome Wenfei back to the screen to go through some of the chat questions. And again, I'm sorry I didn't get to all of your questions, but hopefully we'll get a few more answered. So can you see all the questions on the, okay.
So yeah, no, it's lovely. I'm just,
there are a lot of them, I'm sure.
no, well, there's a lot of very sweet sort of thank you, encouraging things. So good. I'm trying to find the questions. Well, one of the questions is, does the nicotine in the cigarette butts work as an insecticide? And I think that's the basic hypothesis, but not been well tested. But that would be the best experiment to do. Gosh, are you seeing any questions?
Actually, I'll jump back in. There was a very specific question about one of the pages of the book that clearly somebody has already bought the book, my friend Sarah.
Oh, yes.
And she says, divorce rates she's quoting, divorce rates in birds vary from 98% in greater flamingos to a mere 2% in barnacle geese, but lower on the page, this is page 79, lower on the page, referring to a picture on the bottom, it says greater flamingos are the most widespread flamingo series with a pair bond with their partners for life. Can you explain what the difference is there?
I think I probably got that wrong.
Fair.
I think I would go with the 98%, the top one.
there was a question about one of the
Oh,
early pictures that you had in your talk about the birds that were nesting in the acacia tree in
mm,
Kenya, and all of the branches or all of the nests seem to be out on the end of the branches.
snakes.
Okay.
So, so basically, why are all the nests way on the tips of the branches? It seems very precarious, right? Rather than at the, and I mean, especially in, I think a lot of Asia and Africa and Australia, especially Australia and Africa, I would imagine, the snake predation is just appalling. So I think even putting them at the edge of the branches is not perfect, but it's a bit better than um, putting and other predators as well. At least a snake might get to it, but a squirrel or something might fall off before it gets right to the end of the branch.
Question about pigeons and humans. Obviously, pigeons are a bird that we see a lot in cities. Are they more complicated than we think they are?
Pigeons?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, I think so. Well, there's some really wonderful early experiments done by, Skinner, who was all about all this operant conditioning and lever pressing in rats and pigeons. But one of the things that really amazed me was that he could get pigeons to tell the difference between different impressionist artists. So pigeon was very good at telling a Monet from a Degas from a Van Gogh or something, which I think is pretty good. And also, if you think about the things pigeons can do in terms of finding their way back, homing pigeons, that's an amazing ability that we still don't really. People are still doing experiments on exactly how pigeons know where to go, where to fly, and how to find their way back. That's pretty much not completely solved at all. There seems to be some sense of smell involved, and there's obviously memory, but that's a complicated behavior. And actually, one of my favorite biologists who's done a lot of the work inspiring all this sort of implicit conflict within families, whether it's between siblings or between parents, or between partners in a romantic relationship. He got a lot of his inspiration from watching pigeons outside his apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
I'll just go ahead with a couple more.
Yeah.
For folks watching birds at home these days, are there any specific behaviors we should be looking out for? We were talking before we came online about the hummingbirds that we here in Portland have in our
Yeah.
neighborhoods, but I'm curious, what should we be looking for?
Oh, well, I know Cornell has a specific, the Lab of Ornithology has a specific thing called Project Feeder Watch. So that's something that if you really wanted to sort of contribute data directly, they would send you a bunch of questions to answer. A very easy one is just recording through something like eBird what you're seeing when. And especially because it's very tempting for bird watchers to just report the most unusual things. And that leads to a lot of bias in terms of what gets counted. But otherwise, I would just look out for things that you don't think are, well, that you find unusual. And I suppose you won't know what's unusual until you observe enough to know what's usual. But I love at this time of year, I'm hearing the great horned owls hooting to each other almost every night. And I just find that birds are always doing something that I'm not expecting them to do or that I'm curious about. So I would look out for things that just puzzle you and then try and find an answer. With the duck rape thing, I actually saw that when I was a student and had no idea what it was. And I couldn't find anything about it at that point because it hadn't really been studied yet in the literature. And I was really confused by it. This was 20 years ago or something. So there's always something going on that wants an explanation.
there was a question about the honey guides, which I found to be a very charming story. Do the birds need the humans because the bees were stinging the birds, or you mentioned something about the
Yeah,
wax?
sorry. So I skipped through that very fast. And actually, the earliest someone else I saw had a point about the first studies on this were done by a Kenyan researcher, and then no one followed up. That was in the 80s, I think, that was published. No one followed up on it till much more recently. But the basic situation is it's hard for the birds to get at the wax unless, because of the bees stinging and so forth, unless someone like a human actually comes and opens the hive up. And humans use smoke to dull the bees and then get the honey. And in the process, they leave all this bit of honeycomb behind, which is what the birds are after. Does that make more sense?
Yes, it does. And I think we're going to wrap up here, but I just want to point out to the folks who are still watching, and also to you, Wenfei, that somebody just posted on our Instagram page that one of our watchers, our attendees this evening, was a 6-year-old who took some notes.
Oh,
And there's a photo of the notes, and it's
oh,
most excellent. So if you're on
I would love
Instagram,
to
check us
see that.
out, Science on Tap,
Okay.
ORWA, and we'll
Oh,
repost
I'm
that.
so flattered. Thank you.
It's
And
pretty
actually,
adorable.
there was a question a couple of times about whether I studied art or something like that. Um, and no, I didn't. And actually, I was very dog and horse obsessed as a little. So I think I started drawing horses at about 3, and I just drew horses all the time. And then the birding came later. So that answers that question.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here and everything you've shared with us this evening. Again, all of you folks who are still here, please go check out the books. They are lovely and very charming, and lots of really good scientific information in them as well. And again, thank you, Dr. Wenfei Tong.
Thank you very much.